everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Joanna G. Holden and I'm a Christian author of fantasy as well as being an author tuber here on YouTube. And today's video is all about my post-writing process, the bulk of which is editing. I personally am very inspired when I get to watch other authors share how they do things like the pre-writing process, the actual drafting process, and of course the post-writing process. So I wanted to share with you guys today my current personal post-writing process. And the reason I'm stressing current is because the amazing thing about all writing processes and all the various stages of writing is that they can change over time. Up until a few years ago, my writing process was pretty much all the same, and I very seldom got to the editing part because I didn't finish anything. Most of my projects were so big that I never completed them. There was just too much going on. But then I discovered AuthorTube and I started learning all these amazing different ways to do editing. I learned all these amazing different ways to do writing and the pre-writing process. And my process began to change and it began to develop. And then even since then, over the last couple of years, it has changed multiple times, improving every year, getting better every year, being more efficient with every new try. Now I have developed a system that I think will probably be my editing system for a while. It may change, but I've kind of fine-tuned it now to where it really works for me. And that's the most important part of any writing process, of any stage of writing, is that it works for you. Okay, enough of all that chit-chat. Let's get down to it. So for the most part, my writing process consists of two phases, the self-editing phase and the assisted editing phase. But sometimes it can include a first step, which is the rewrite. This is where the manuscript is so bad or it's so messed up or just so confusing. Maybe I had to go and I changed so many plot points, it's not the same story anymore. Whatever the case may be, it's not right. It's not what I wanted it to be, so I kind of have to start over. Sometimes this just means taking huge chunks out of the story and rewriting those chunks. Sometimes most of the manuscript has to be trashed and I keep some parts of it. And then there are other times, it hurts so bad, where I have to scratch the whole thing and start over with absolutely nothing. I am probably going to have to do this with the Coastlander book because, yeah, it's a mess. I'm going to go through each of these three steps and kind of what I do for each step. Okay, so the first step, the rewrite. So when I do have to go through and do a complete rewrite, there's basically just two things that I do. The first is I go back through and I completely re-outline. So I take the old outline, usually it's been changed multiple times, so I take all the outlines that I can find, and I pull out all the scenes that I want to keep, like that I want to rewrite, and then I add in all the scenes that I want to put in new, take out scenes that I don't want to use at all, and then once I get that jumbled mess straightened out, then I put it through the plotting structure, beats, and get a system figured out for how I want the book to kind of lay out, what I want the rising and falling of action to be, where the climax needs to be, midpoint, so on and so forth. I get it all re-outlined and ready to go. And then I retype. This one hurts probably the most of all because typing up the book itself, it can take a really long time, but when you're redrafting, pretty much you have to do that anyway. Like, there's no way to get around that. So you have to retype the whole thing. Even sections that I'm keeping, I go ahead and I retype them because retyping it forces me to edit as I go. At the end of the rewriting process, I have a new first draft and I continue on to the second phase, which is self-edits. The first thing I do for a self-edit is, I print out the manuscript. This is actually not the full manuscript. This is like Act 1, I think. But I print out the full manuscript so that I can actually hold it and look at it on a page. Now, there are a lot of people who don't print out. If you have never done it before, I would encourage you to try. For me, there is just something different about holding it in my hands physically that reminds me that someday this is going to be a book that people are going to physically hold. And looking at pages instead of looking at a screen, sometimes I'll catch more stuff that way. It's also much easier for me for editing because of the next part, which includes my highlighter system. Yay! I love color coordinating things. It helps me to quickly visualize organization. And I'm not a naturally organized person, so that makes it more visual for me and easier for me and simpler for me, then I love it. And that's exactly what this highlighting system does. It sounds kind of like it'd be complex, but it's really not. And because they're highlighters, instead of having to use pens to describe every little thing that I want to do, I can just highlight it and instantly I know when I look back through what I have to do to fix it. Let me explain. So I have here a chart. You can see I actually have lots of notes on what to do during rewrites, or for edits, sorry. I have lots of notes for edits here, but basically I have a color for each type of edit that I'm going to need. The yellow I use for grammatical problems, punctuation problems, word that's not used correctly, something that needs to be italicized. I just highlight it, and then I don't have to sit there and like write in period needed here, comma needed here. I just put this over, and then when I look at it later, I'll know exactly what it was. And then the one that I use the most often is orange. I am an overwriter, like majorly. So orange is on every page just about. Orange stands for this needs to be condensed. Basically, say it shorter, say it simpler, say it easier to read. Pink, blue, and green. Pink stands for characters. This is where if a character does something or says something that does not make sense for their character, or I need to add in something about their character here, maybe a character journey plot point or something of that nature, or a revelation of some kind, I can highlight back over with this to let myself know to go back and say, okay, what do I need to add in here? This one I usually use some description with. Like I'll take a pen and I'll actually write down the specific character plot point that needs to be introduced or that it's contradictory. But yeah, pink doesn't get used very much except at the beginning of the chapter, and I'll describe that in a minute. I'll talk about that. The blue one is for plot. This is where I have a plot hole, where I need to add in something about a subplot, where I need to untangle a plot mess, whatever it may be. A lot of times I'll use these for like plot beats. I've been very into plotting structure lately. As you've probably seen, if you follow me on Instagram, you know I've been into like superstructure, Save the Cat Writes a Novel, all that good stuff. Because I just discovered it. I don't know how I lived that long without it. But the blue is going to help me with those. It's going to help me to remember that my beats are in there. It's going to help me make sure that my plot makes sense, that I'm not repeating myself, whatever. The blue is very handy for that. And again, this usually, I'll show you how I use it at the beginning of the chapter in a minute. Last but not least, we have green, which is for setting. And I thought green was perfect because green reminds me of grass, which reminds me of the outdoors, which reminds me of setting. So green is here to remind me, hey, this description is terrible, or hey, you actually need a description here. I do this one actually more often than I'd like to admit. So green is used for that. Let me show you real quickly a page and how it ends up looking. I also use pens and, again, colors because I'm obsessed. So I will pick the color of pen that I've kind of chosen for the story. I'll talk more about that in my pre-writing process video. That should be coming up soon. But I will pick the color for the story. So for Snow Dust, it was blue. I will pick that pen color, and I will use this to cross out words that don't need to be there, to write in notes when I need to specify what I'm talking about with my highlighters. Let me give you an example here. So this is a sheet. This is one of the chapter pages. There's a chapter break there. So you can see like here, I highlighted this because it needed to be italicized. I highlighted this because I changed up some of the capitalization and punctuation. And then this whole thing right here needs to be condensed because it's a whole bunch of run-on sentences. Did I mention I'm an overwriter? And then as you can see here, I have some pink and I have some green. So this chapter needed a description that via the 5 senses, because we want to show, not tell, right? This one needed a description of the attic that the children are playing in, and it needed to be described as playful, childhood, like very much capturing the essence of childhood, in a sense, in this picture. So I went ahead and wrote down what I needed specifically, and then I underlined it with a color highlighter so that I knew what it was specifically that I was doing. And then here I have a pink thing. I had to add in a character flaw to the chapter, but I didn't know yet exactly where I wanted that to be added in. So just at the beginning of the chapter to let myself know, in this chapter, this needs to happen. And I wrote down that it's a hint at a particular character's flaw. So you can see how mostly I just use the orange and the yellow on the manuscript to condense or to fix words and narrative. And then at the beginning of the chapter especially, I will throw in a lot of those. This first chapter always gets the most edits. But you can see I have a ton of character stuff here, as well as a little tiny bit of plot that needs to be introduced, and more description, and more character stuff. So yeah, with the characters, the setting, and the plot, a lot of times I am forced to write down specifically what it is that I'm trying to do. But with overwritten sentences and some grammatical and punctuation errors, 9 times out of 10 I don't actually have to write down what I want to do to fix it. I will like use my pen to cross out a punctuation mark if I need to, or to like point arrows to tell me that I'm switching them, but a lot of times I'll leave that for the next stage in the self-edit stage. The next part is putting all the things that I just did with my read-through into the computer. So I will take my manuscript, I will mark it up, then I will take those notes and I will go to the computer and I'll sit down and I will go through each chapter one at a time, and I will fill in the edits that I need to make on the original Word documents. Now with rewrite, I would retype the whole thing. I have done retyping of like a second draft before where I transfer it and edit as I go, even though I'm not really changing the manuscript, but this takes a lot of time. So unless I'm not happy with how the narration turned out or just the general flow of the book, I skip that entirely and I just fix things in the Word document. And I do use Microsoft Word for those of you who are interested. I know lots of people like it, lots of different programs. There's Word, there's Scrivener, there's Google Docs. My personal preference is Microsoft Word, and that's just because it doesn't require internet connection for me, and it also has, KDP has pre-made templates for formatting that are easily transferable over to Word documents, and that's just easier for me. So that first round of edits with my read-through is usually like bigger picture stuff. I'm really focusing in on making sure my characters shine through and hit all of their character journey points. I'm making sure that my plot structure is sound and that I have a very clear rise of action and fall of action. And then of course making sure that I have settings, that I am describing my setting in a way that really brings the readers into the world. Then I print out the manuscript a second time and I go back through with my highlighters again and my pen, and this time I go through and I nitpick every single little detail. I try to get rid of as many words as possible. I'm going in for more of like the nitty gritty. I'm getting rid of words that I don't need. I'm chopping out every sentence I don't need. I'm making sure everything is as tight and toned as it possibly can be. Usually during the second set, I will sit down with my paper, and I will write up a list of all of the crutch words that I notice, which are words that I tend to use over and over and over again. For me, one of my biggest is actually and really. Those two I use all the time, and I'm not sure why. You've probably heard me use them on this. And also the word so, starting a sentence with the word so. I do that a lot. Then I also have a list of common filter words. These are words that break up a sentence in a way that it keeps you from being inside the character's head, and it becomes more of telling instead of showing. It's words like felt, saw, realized, heard. So to get inside the character's head, you know, you would say, my heart was beating fast, which is a terrible sentence anyway, but my heart was beating wildly. If you put a filter on there, it's I felt my heart beat wildly. Well, that's not a bad sentence, but it makes a sentence longer and it distances you from the action. Instead of just telling you what it's doing, you're describing that, you know, you saw it or you felt it or you realized. It's adding in extra words and it's distancing you from the action. So I will sit down with a list of my crutch words and a list of common filter words, and I will really nitpick my narrative and my dialogue and try to get all those extra words out that don't need to be there. And lastly, we get to assisted edits. As I mentioned in my last video, Snow Dust will be the first book that I've ever done with beta readers. However, I have kind of done the process with multiple critique partners, so I feel like it's kind of sort of the same thing. So I still know what to expect from it, and I think I can still say that I've done it sort of. I have never worked with a professional editor though, so I am both excited and terrified to do that. But that will be coming up. I will probably do a video about my beta reading experience to kind of share how I do that and you know, what I learned from it and how I do things differently or how I would continue doing things the same with that. And then I'll also probably make a video on professional editing because again, this channel is about sharing information, learning information, you know, revealing the process and the messy journey of a writer. So that's it, guys. That is my current editing process. I really hope that this video helped you to maybe get some new ideas on how to do edits and inspired you to keep going, because editing can sometimes be a death trap for writers. We feel like editing is so dry and so boring, but it really doesn't have to be. You're polishing your work. You're making it the best that it can be. I hope that this inspired you to look at it differently and maybe give you some new ideas on how to do your own editing. Let me know in the comments below if you have a highlighter system or a color coordination system. If you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. It goes a long way to support me and my channel. And all the information you could need to know about me, my books, or the services that I offer to writers as a writer are in the description box below. You can find me on social media, and all of those are linked in the description box below. Instagram is where I am honestly the most active, so if you're big on Instagram, then make sure to check me out there, because that's where I put the most stuff the most frequently, and honestly where I just have the most fun. Other than YouTube, of course, because this is kind of my baby. I hope you have an amazing rest of the weekend writing, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!